like there's a bit of a lack of respect, I think, sometimes with the NHS. When something gets so underfunded, you start to lose any faith in it, don't you?
I've seen a huge spike in the amount of young people seeking support from like CAMS services, an increased number of ADHD and ASD diagnoses.
Neurodivergent minds particularly are so powerful and so creative and so wonderful and so insightful.
That I don't do anything without a goal. There's always something I'm trying to get out of it. It made me feel quite slimy. I was like, oh.
I don't think it has to be that we have to wait for therapy to throw us into a mental health understanding.
Now, I don't think I could cope. I'm really funny now with noise. I'm like, it has to be quiet. I still think we hold on to this mental health is woo-woo mentality.
Oh, hang on. Actually, this has taught me quite a lot about myself.
I wouldn't spot this in myself without saying it out loud to someone else.
You're going to be much better equipped to manage those little moments or design a lifestyle that suits exactly what you need.
What's your instinct telling you? You'll be alright. You're going 7 days a week. You're eventually... Okay, how does that actually impact me? Welcome back to the Not Quite Pod. Today we've got Jo with us. Jo, just quickly want to introduce yourself and let everyone know a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Jo Carlile. I'm a clinical psychologist and I work with people who are in a bit of a pickle, specialising in neurodivergent minds and trauma, and I'm delighted to be here.
I'm actually really looking forward to this because we're going to cover a lot that I talk about a lot. So I'm really looking forward to diving into this. But before we dive into a bit more about what you do, can you tell us a bit more about you and what led you to sort of where you are today? Because I always find with guests that gives you a bit of context as to who they are as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I suppose how I became a psychologist and how I became here today is I didn't really enjoy school too much, didn't find the subject that interesting, and then got a chance to study something more interesting, which was people, which has always been fascinating to me, and found out that psychology is something where you get to literally study people and how people behave, which is arguably the best subject of all. And so went to university, really, really enjoyed it, and then kind of found that you could help people who were kind of struggling a little bit, who might be needing some support and feeling understood. And that kind of set me off down the path of clinical psychology. So it's quite a long training, working trajectory. It took about sort of 10 years in total, and worked predominantly in the NHS, across different settings, but lots with people with ADHD, autism and neurodivergent minds. And then I left the NHS after I had my own child, because not so family friendly always. The NHS as an establishment is, but just how I wanted to work kind of just didn't match up. Yep. So started up my own private practice, which was 5 years ago, and love it. Really, really enjoyed now working with people who aren't in the NHS system, but are still potentially wanting some support, either proactively, so knowing that, something might not be quite right, how can I get some space to work this out, or reactively and kind of responding to some trauma.
Actually, you've led me to one of my questions I was going to ask, and that is what do you think of the position that the NHS is in with therapy and psychological support at the moment? Because we're seeing a lot of people transition a lot more to going to private practices, and I just wondered, as someone that's done both, I just wondered what your views on it were.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult, isn't it, to, I suppose, be impartial about the NHS at the moment. There is a lot that is not going so well, and I think therapy times for people are quite appalling across certain sectors. And I think the trouble is there's so many wonderful clinicians working in the NHS across all types of specialty. The people of the NHS are pure magic. And I'm not just saying that because I used to be one of those people. I'm meaning the people probably still there now. But what happens is the system as a whole is incredibly underfunded and badly designed. And so those magical people that have wonderful expertise are not able to be seen. People are waiting to see them, or the pathways aren't kind of quite designed. I still think there's still like a one size fits all approach, and there's kind of quotas and thresholds and cut-offs that therapists in the NHS have to follow. And since moving into the private sector, I appreciate my work is much more geared now to people who have the luxury of being able to afford the time, but it also means I'm incredibly free now to work with people in a way that they exactly need it, which is wonderful. And I think the NHS might get there, but I think it's still a long way behind.
Yeah, I often have this debate on the pod of what we do about the NHS, because it's an outstanding thing, but there's just not enough of it. There's just not enough money, not enough people. Money's being put in the wrong places, people argue. I have a bit of a controversial opinion. I think we need to find a hybrid between us and the US, because everyone hates on the US, but I think some services could be covered by insurance rather than covered by a state thing, if that makes sense.
I feel like there's a bit of a lack of respect, I think, sometimes for the NHS and what it can give you, because when something gets so underfunded, you start to lose any faith in it, don't you?
Yeah.
So
as a wheelchair user, now majority of my care and support, I've looked at other ways of funding it because I wasn't getting what I needed from my local services, and that way that doesn't help as well that I'm a bit of a control freak. So it was the whole thing of I felt very out of control, whereas now I feel a lot more in control. But it's something I experience as a wheelchair user of you're constantly battling to get through. I was talking to one of the teams that I still use in the NHS, and I just wanted a simple phone number. And they wanted me to make a full referral. And I'm like, I just need a phone number. I don't need a full referral. I know who I need to speak to. I just need their phone number. And it's just that barrier to entry as well. I think that's something we see all the time with the NHS.
Yeah, and I think it's actually quite re-traumatising for people. A lot of what I've kind of see in my work is getting support, whether that be going to a GP and trying to find yourself on a wait list, or you're in the private sector trying to find a therapist, and how do you know who's, in quote, good, and where are you supposed to look? Like that initial start of someone's therapy journey or help seeking journey doesn't need to be mental health, it can be anything, is hard. And if you're met with barriers, or you're met with a lack of trust, or you're let down, or you're ignored, or you're forgotten, you're re-traumatizing, or you're escalating that pain, whether that be emotional pain or physical pain, whatever it is. And so I do think there's a lot that needs to be thought about in terms of how do people access good help, whether that's private or public.
Yeah, 100%. And I think as well, but us as outsiders, it's also, I always try to remember that it's not the person on the end of the phone's fault.
Yeah.
Oftentimes they have a line that they have to toe, and that is the line, and unfortunately there isn't a lot of wiggle room with that where it's a public sector. But we're proper getting into the weeds a bit. But I think it's an industry that we're seeing used more and more. I think I'm intrigued to sort of get an understanding, because I know you've done a lot of work with young people, and I've seen a huge spike in the amount of young people seeking support from like CAMS services, as well as an increased number of ADHD and ASD diagnoses. So I just wondered, what have you seen from your work within that sector, and is there any sort of nuance or insight you could give?
I think the themes are the same. I think I started my career in CAMS and worked predominantly in that. Well, actually, it's probably ended up being half and half. But I think the themes are the same. Some amazingly talented, great people and great teams that don't have the space or the resources to be able to provide the care that is needed.
Yeah.
And that, for families and for young people, and then for the clinicians as well, is incredibly frustrating and demoralising. And to use the word again, like it's re-traumatising. If you think of you think of a young child who's struggling for whatever reason, they're trying to get some support and perhaps families aren't quite managing, so they go to someone else, and then the team then can't quite manage because they don't have the resources. It's a kind of a constant thread of feeling like either I'm not worthy enough or people don't understand me. And actually, given the right space and the right environment and the right tools, maybe everybody could be understood.
Yeah. With your work with young people, is there any advice you'd give to parents? Because there's a lot of people out there that don't really know where to start with it all.
Yeah, I guess there's like traditional pathways of going to your GP and finding out resources that way. Schools is another really good resource, talking to Senkos. I think if you find yourself struggling and you're not sure where to go, utilising the traditional routes of school, GP, local services, councils, but also there's some really good online kind of communities. And, there's, I was talking to somebody the other day about an app called Family, I think it is. And that's about trying to connect families with support quite early on. So there's, if you know where to look, which is often hard, there's lots of good resources out there. It's I guess, how do we make them heard and how do we make them seen?
And I would also caveat that to, as someone in the sort of disability space, I also reach out to people that will use or have said about using the services that you're hoping to access, because a lot of us will happily guide you through the process, having been through it ourselves, and we'll also point out, don't go this route, go this route because it's quicker, this you'll get a better service. There's so much knowledge in just talking to other people. It's what I always talk about when people ask me about neurodiversity. I sit there and go, I can't speak on it directly because I don't have any diagnosis of it and I don't identify as that, but I know loads of people within the sector that are more than happy to chat to you about all the services available. So I think talking to the community is such a powerful thing as well.
Totally. I was just literally having a conversation with someone today about peer support. And I was talking to him. He's in the field of active listening and has developed an app for active listeners. And we were talking about how powerful it is to have peer support and to be able to share, not just for someone looking for that support, but also, like you said, to be able to give a kind of a recommendation or a reflection of what you've learned and what like the shortcuts, and that's also really empowering. Because for me, I never, as a professional, I appreciate I have training and I'm experienced in areas of therapy, but I'm not an expert in anyone. You're the expert. Your story is your story, and your lessons and what you've learned are much more powerful than sometimes what a therapist can say. So I would definitely agree. Peer support is a lovely place to start.
Coming on to we've spoken a lot about neurodiversity, and I'm just curious, where did your interest come from when it came to specialising more and more in neurodiversity, ASD and ADHD?
I think I initially sort of fell into it because in the field of clinical psychology, it's like any kind of job. You get experience and then you get jobs based on that experience. And so I happened to start in autism and young people. And so then I got more jobs in autism or ADHD, young people, neurodiversity. And when I first started training, which was about 18 years ago, I think, neurodiversity wasn't really spoken about. It was very much people had autism, people had ADHD, and they were predominantly boys, and they presented in a very specific way. Mm-hmm. And so my clinical career has sort of grown up alongside the neurodiversity movement, particularly the last sort of 5 to 10 years, I suppose. And I guess what drew me, or like once I was in that world, what I really enjoy about working and championing and empowering people with neurodivergent minds is that, for me, understanding the way that you're wired is fundamental to how you need to live your life. And that is just as important if you have a diagnosis framework around you or you're not diagnosed with having a neurodiverse mind. It's, for me, understanding who you are cannot happen without understanding your wiring. And I feel I'm not trying to undermine people who have a diagnosis, because it's a real, for some people, it's incredibly debilitating and it's an incredible struggle. And so we need to be able to give power to those people and support those people. But I also just feel in general, any kind of therapeutic journey or any understanding of yourself has to include the way you're wired. And so that's why I sort of stayed in this field, because I love it. And also neurodivergent minds particularly are so powerful and so creative and so wonderful and so insightful that I love working in the area that I do.
I think it's interesting because I think it is that whole thing of, even because people often see a reason to go into psychology or a reason to go and seek therapy is that you've got a condition that you need support with. Whereas you've just said there, understanding how your brain works is powerful for everyone. I say that as someone that's going through therapy themselves. There are so many things my therapist point out to me and I'm like, that is really weird. One of them being, to give you a real world example, that I don't do anything without a goal. So there's always a goal attached to what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And it was one of those, that makes no sense. But then understanding, looking at everything and I'm doing it again and understanding that is so powerful.
Yes. Because how useful is that for you? Because if you know that about yourself, then you know, actually, okay, in a time where suddenly the goal goes or there's no goal, I might feel a bit stressed by that. Sorry, you might feel a bit stressed by that. But if you know, well, I know it's because I like to have a goal. So let's put one back in, or,
The worst thing is it made me feel quite, what's the word? Not arrogant's the wrong word, but like, there's always something I'm trying to get out of it. It made me feel quite slimy. I was like, I don't like that.
But I don't see that as a negative. I see that as an absolutely lovely strength. Your brain is the type of brain that likes to know where it's going. It likes to have a focus, and that's what pushes it into gear. There's absolutely no shame required for that.
It was funny because one of the realizations we had was, I think it comes from where I've got cerebral palsy and a wheelchair user. I have to plan everything. So everything is like, okay, we're going to go here, then we're going to go here, then here, then here. Physical disabilities kill any spontaneity.
Yeah.
So that, I think, where it comes from.
Yeah, and that's where the clever interweave is between nature and nurture. You have a type of brain that will lean heavily into your experience. And so you put those two together, perhaps a brain that is forward thinking or, likes organization. And then you put that with your experience of your physical needs. And over time, you have a narrative that says, actually, in order for me to feel safe and feel good, like, I need a plan and I need a goal. And this works best for me.
Yeah. But then that clearly shows how we're all wired different. And I think that, like we've said, there's so much power in understanding how you're wired. Also, because it can also give you insight into other people and go, you're demonstrating a similar behaviour to what I do. Oh, okay, I know how your brain works. Not even in that respect, but in terms of you can relate on it, and then that often builds relationships.
Totally. And connections is such a big part of what we need in life. And, that's where I found a lot of the neurodiverse chat has been really uplifting and enlightening, because historically there was this idea that if you had a neurodivergent mind, you didn't really want to be social and you didn't really want to be around other people. And actually that's so inaccurate. And so I love the idea of connectedness and relationships, and reminding everybody that we're all very social humans in our own ways, and how we recharge from social situations is different, and what we gain from social situations is really different. But ultimately, we need connection always.
What do you think about the direction we're going in? Obviously, we're recording now on a remote podcast. Do you think there's power in that for connection? Because I have a very weird view of everyone's talking about going back into the office, particularly when it comes to work, because of the connection. My argument is you don't need to be in person to build a connection. But I wondered, particularly you've worked with businesses, you work with neurodiversities, there's going to be a lot of overlap. So I just wondered what your view on that is.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because prior to COVID, I had never done an online session before. I'd done perhaps telephone support. in various services, but I've never done online therapy in the way that COVID suddenly gave that to everybody. And I have been incredibly impressed with what I can still connect with over online. For me, it's absolutely no different. I don't know if you've heard of transference. Yeah. So for people that don't know, it's what you pick up from a conversation with someone. And in therapy, you often pick up a lot of what the person's thinking or saying inside without showing. And I don't mean non-verbal kind of cues. I mean a little bit more, psycho-y, fuddy-duddy than that.
Nuance.
But you still get that online. For me, there is absolutely no difference. And so that's been really interesting. And I always sit on the fence with everything. Apologies for that. But I love the middle ground. I feel like if you're too far in either direction, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I think for me, I think you can get a lot of connection from online, and I love how freeing it is for people. I love the thought of someone who cannot manage an office environment because it's too socially draining to be able to tap in and out of meetings and connect with colleagues in that way. I think that's just absolutely lovely. But I do think physical contact from people that really lift you up or people that you feel incredibly connected to, I think that needs to happen like face to face. So for me, it's always a middle ground.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think in the work context, I get frustrated because with my disability, DEI brain on, we're going backwards. But then also I argue that because often the rebuttal is, but you can't do everything you can do online and you don't build relationships. I rebuttal that with two of my bestest friends in the last 4 years that I'm now really close to, I met online.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think I guess for me, again, it's the way that I work. I'm very individualized. I'm incredibly individualized. I couldn't tell you what would work for this person and then say, right, okay, now that's going to work for everyone. I think what COVID allowed us to do is serve a whole new population of people that were just having to go into the office against all of their needs. And I think we swung really far that way, which was really great for those people that have had to just suffer in silence. And then now the pull is to swing everyone back. And I just think maybe we can think about it individually.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. My thing is always to give people the choice instead of this, particularly like from a work perspective, this whole thing of, no, you got to be in the office twice a week or you got to be 5 days a week. Why isn't it just, if you want to come into the office is there. If you don't want to come into the office, that's also absolutely fine. As long as you get the work done, that should be the main goal. And I just don't understand it. I really don't.
Totally. Yeah. I'm with you.
It's just strange because I just sit there thinking that's... Because I think the other argument I say is you get really good talent if you open the door to remote working because you can recruit. If you're in London, you can get someone in Liverpool, Manchester, Spain, wherever you want to go. And then I'd say from an accessibility point of view... I mean, I remember when I left school, I really struggled to get my first job because I couldn't get into any of the buildings. And when I suggested remote working, it was, you're 17, we can't trust you to do that.
I think it's often a case of really changing the narratives that people have.
Yeah.
People have this idea, and I guess it's because you used to not be able to do your job from home. Like if we think about what the industry used to be, the Industrial Revolution, it wasn't tech, you didn't have resources at home.
Yeah.
So the narrative, of course, then would be, well, you can't do that at home. Why would you be at home? So if you're not at work, you must be Skyping or you must be avoiding. And these narratives, and I think, do you know what happens across all of life? You believe a narrative, and if you're not questioning that and you're not rechecking it and you're not just kind of making sure, is this still relevant? We can get really stuck in narratives that don't suit us. And I think that's an example at work. It's that same thing. It's like, well, if you're not here, you're not doing work. And if we say, okay, let's check that. Let's run that through. Like, do we have evidence for that? Or could we mix up that narrative a bit?
One of my big things is I always say about myself, I now, having spent the first few years in work in an office, now I don't think I could cope. I'm really funny now with noise. I'm like, it has to be quiet. I can't deal with all the phone calls and everything else. I'm like, So I get so much more done when I'm at home.
But I think, do you know what COVID taught a lot of people was because they just historically gone into the office and worked and did what was asked of them at a cost they wouldn't have been sure about. What COVID did for lots of people is see what they could be like when they don't have that demand.
Yeah.
And how much more energy they might have had, how much more freedom they might have had, how much less stress they might have had. And I know this is not everybody, but it's interesting. You get often kind of big disasters or big changes, big struggles throw you into something. They mix things up.
Yeah.
And out of that sometimes comes realization or another way of living that you think, oh, hang on, actually, this has taught me quite a lot about myself. And I think COVID did that for a lot of people. And lots of people have changed the way that they structure their lives now because of that.
It forces people to adapt. It forced everyone to adapt. I mean, I know from my work, we didn't have the infrastructure to get everyone working from home. And suddenly within 2 weeks, we did.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it forces change, doesn't it?
Yeah, but we've gone on a very big business tangent, and I wanted to tap into the reason I asked you that. So I know it's a sector that you do some work in. So I wanted to get you to talk us through the different sectors you work in and sort of the journeys within them. So obviously you do some work in personal therapy, business therapy. You also support businesses as well. You've worked in the NHS, so I just wanted to sort of see the commonalities between each one.
Yeah, so I suppose the main thread is supporting people or businesses to prioritise well-being in whatever that looks like, and prioritise well-being in a way that is individualised and accepting of needs, really. So, you know, my one-to-one therapy is quite traditional. It's online, face-to-face. I have clients. I do CBT or narrative or EMDR. My business support and therapy is around working with teams who might be going through something and needing some support, some debrief, or psychoeducation around mental wellness, well-being. And then I also support people who are in business who might not be having a mental health, I guess, obvious mental health moment, but they want to thrive and learn things about themselves, which is going to help them to feel more confident and less stressed at work. And I guess the threat, and we're also building a platform to match people to therapists as well and provide psychoeducation for therapists, because I guess what the thread is, you asked for what's the kind of common thread of it all, is I'm on a real mission to help people have better access to information and education about mental well-being. Not coming from a framework of, I'm a therapist, there's something wrong with you, let me help you. I'm rejecting that. I'm saying there's ultimately a real lovely need for therapy in the right space, but there's also lots that we can do to give people education and understanding so that they can become their own therapist. And that's not to say that you then might not need therapy at some point if life throws you one of those really big balls that just feels too heavy to handle. But I don't think it has to be that we have to wait for therapy to throw us into a mental health understanding. I think there's a lot that we could be doing. So one of my big kind of missions that is across all of my individual, my business, and also the product we're building is how can we get people to feel more confident about where to find a therapist if they want one, or to be their own therapist if they'd like to be, because the information is not accessible right now, and it needs to be.
Yeah. I'm intrigued by this idea of you being your own therapist, because there's definitely, from my therapy journey, there's definitely been bits that I've pulled and gone, oh, okay, this is like I could use in this situation. But for me, I would sit there and go, I wouldn't spot this in myself without saying it out loud to someone else, and then someone reflecting that back to me, and I'd be like, oh, okay, that now makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a thing, I guess. There's a fine line between not ever really being able to replicate a therapeutic space and a therapeutic relationship. And as a therapist, I'm obviously biased, but I think you can't replace that, and you don't ever need to, really. But I think there's a pre-therapy or a post-therapy moment where you can take control over your life and understand more about the way that you're wired, or what the stage of your life that you're at and what you're going through, or your strengths. That gives you some really good tools to be able to be a therapist to yourself before you end up struggling or after you end up struggling. So for me, it's a continuum. And
I can completely agree. I think as well, there's that element of you also use those tools with the people around you. Like one of my partner won't mind me. One of the ones with my partner is like, what's your instinct telling you? And then I can then reflect that back to her, and she goes, oh, okay, yeah, you've reminded me to follow that, not this. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So that's the other power, I suppose, in knowing it yourself and using those tools, is you can give those tools to someone else to support you should you need it.
Totally. And I think that's exactly it. You're not trying to replicate a therapeutic journey, but you're trying to remind yourself that you're the expert in yourself. And given the right framework to understand yourself, you're going to be much better equipped to manage those little moments or design a lifestyle that suits exactly what you need, or because you just have better understanding. And historically, we've not been good at that as a society, as a culture. We think of mental health as you're either you're well and everything's fine, or you've got a disorder and you need some sort of help.
I still think we hold on to this mental health is woo-woo mentality. Because I even see it with my parents. Obviously, parents are of a different generation. They're definitely different. They're still on that whole, you'll be all right.
Exactly.
Whereas my generation and anyone that's sort of explored therapy have a very different viewpoint. And I think that's interesting we've kept it. And I want to dive into as well how you've seen it with businesses. Because I think my fear whenever a business says, oh, we bring in support for people's mental health is similar to the idea of businesses have a disability quota. Is it just a tick? So I'd be intrigued as someone that's working in that space, what your journey's been like, sort of supporting businesses with supporting either their staff's mental health or just good practice. What is that? How have those conversations gone? But then I suppose if they're reaching out to you, they've already started on that journey. So difficult.
Exactly. And I think there's a long, long way to go. I suppose for me, most of the people, so I don't really advertise necessarily. I historically get a lot of my business clients through my network already. Yep. So that must mean that the businesses I'm getting are already looking or already quite progressive and proactive.
Yeah.
And I think those businesses that I'm working with, there's a real push for it. There's a real want for it. And they're creating really lovely teams and giving genuine permission for people to prioritise their well-being. But I think there's still a long way to go. And I think there's still a lot of token support happening out there. And for me, you can get someone like me into the business and offer a session or a platform, a training program, or help people through certain difficult times. But that's still a step below a genuine, like I said, a genuine permission to allow employees to be who they need to be, to work how they need to work, and then ultimately to give back their most efficient, most confident, most assertive kind of working self. And I think we're not there yet.
No, and has there been any commonalities of the type of organisations and businesses coming to you? Because I think of, I don't know, my brain just goes, oh, there's probably a lot of like marketing firms that are quite, we're forward thinking. So I was just wondering, is there any commonalities of the type of industries coming for that support?
Yeah, I think potentially my sample is biased again because of the field I work in. Yeah. So I obviously people know me to be within the neurodiversity sphere. So I'll often work with a lot of startup creatives. Human resource teams might get in contact with me if they're pushing a kind of D&I agenda. So I think I definitely work with teams who are looking to support their teams to flourish. There's a real richness. If we think about going back to wiring, kind of doesn't matter what diagnosis you have, you want people around the table that are going to offer you all kinds of richness of wiring. And I think teams, definitely the teams I see, that's kind of what they're looking for. And that's often, I think, in the creative industries is often what they're looking for in that respect.
I love that you've highlighted startups, because that is not where I would have expected it. I always think of, I suppose this is my own bias. I always think of startups as the traditional thing of like, we've not got a lot of money. We can't spend money on doing that.
But the thing is, what you see now, the startups that are coming up now, they might not be at their very, very early stage when they see me, but they are building something that they want to embed a wellness feeling from the beginning. And I think that's where people are trying to integrate it. And that's where it's going to be done the best, isn't it? You integrate it from the word go.
Plant the seed, and then the seed's always there.
Exactly, yeah. But I think I think my sample is biased, because I know I think the bigger corporate businesses, I've kind of done a couple, it's more about a consultant coming in and doing a piece of work and then leaving. I think it's less integrated. And also there's the better helps. There's there's big employee assistance programs, which I think often the bigger businesses focus on. I think startups now, or some startups, want something more bespoke. They want something that fits them and their team.
I love that though, because as I say, traditionally you think of a startup and they're just built for one of had balls to the walls, working every day and night, and then the last thing they're thinking about is their mental health. So it's nice to see, because when you start looking into like the entrepreneurial space, all you see is just keep going. Doesn't matter what happens.
Yeah.
So it's nice to see that you've said that some are going, actually, no, we want to do this the right way, not the wrong way.
Yeah. And for me, I want to see more of it.
100%. And on that note, like we've just briefly mentioned about burnout, and I just wanted to sort of touch on it, how you manage it for yourself, because you're a very busy person, but then also how you manage that as well for clients coming to you with that specific issue, because we've seen a huge increase in the amount of people seeking support for burnout as well.
Yeah. Myself, I definitely try and manage my time and my structure. I know I'm someone that really enjoys work, but it costs me, it drains me. So how can I recharge? And that's not necessarily with my family time, because I have a young family that is equally as draining in lots of other ways. So it's kind of, I guess I manage my week, and I think to myself, right, where's my mastery contribution moments? That's at work. That's when I'm going to feel like I'm doing good, and I'm getting some really nice feelings of contribution and worthiness. Then I think of my other parts of the week. I've got my family time. I'm going to get lots of joy. I'm going to get lots of connectedness there. But where's my downtime? Where's my quiet time? How do I block out moments where I recharge? And that might just be cleaning my home and getting things all sorted and no one's around and just feeling a bit organised. Or it might be going to yoga and not speaking to anybody. Or it might be putting a podcast in and just going for a walk, anything that kind of means I can recharge. And I think that's a really important part of avoiding burnout, because burnout ultimately is when it's another way of saying you don't have capacity. And that might be capacity to work anymore, or capacity to socialise or talk or feel or connect or have any energy, whatever it is. You're basically saying I'm at capacity. And so my advice, if you want to be proactive, is divide your week up or your month up and think, what is the bits I need? Where do I get my energy? What sorts of things give me different energies? But also, where's my energy going to go? Because you need to get the maths right. If you've got lots of energy draining things, how do you build up the energy capacity things?
Yeah, I completely agree. Being a bit of a gym head, I always compare it to the gym of like, if you keep going 7 days a week, you're eventually going to collapse.
Yeah.
I can say that with almost certainty that it's going to happen. So you need to balance it out, because the recovery is just as important. And I say this and I'm the biggest hypocrite going, but that's what I try and do. And I think as well, it's getting out of your own head with it as well. For those of us that are doing so many different things, whether it's you've got little ones, whether it's that you're got a startup or you're doing side hustles or whatever that might be, it doesn't matter if you're a splurge on the floor and can't move.
Exactly. And that's why, prioritizing it is exactly what I think is the most important thing. And I think for me, it's easy for me as a therapist to sort of know this stuff. But, that's, I suppose, why I go back to wanting people to be more aware of it and have more education on it. Because if everyone knew this kind of stuff, then little tweaks could be made that could make such a big difference to people's lives.
What about for clients coming to you with that area of difficulty with burnout? Obviously, they're going to go to you, Jo, I've just not got time. I've got kids, I've got this, I've got that. I've got no time left to give, and I've got no time where I can go and treat myself to yoga or do whatever's for me. Where do you say to clients, okay, why don't we start here and work from there? Where is that starting point if someone's coming to you with that?
Do you know what? I think it's what you've just said a minute ago. For me, there's a lot of work that I do in giving people permission to see self-care not as a luxury. There's a very unhelpful narrative we have in our society that is this concept of selfishness. And I say this to a lot of people, selfishness gets such a bad rep. But ultimately, if we were all selfish, we would all be really lovely, because we would all think, right, what do I need to do? What do I need today? Okay, I need to do this. And within that list, it'll also be connecting with someone or meeting with someone or giving with someone. Like, it just will be. If you ultimately have your own needs met, it will involve meeting someone else's needs. Yeah. And so one of the things I definitely work on with people is reframing this idea of self-care being something that's selfish or something that's a luxury or something that needs to be kind of slotted in alongside everything else. It, for me, and it takes some time for lots of people, is we have to remind ourselves that meeting your own needs is being self-full. It's not being selfish.
I mean, I suppose it's the old cliche that you hear on every flight of put your own mask on before helping others.
That is literally it in life.
But then I think that the difficulty I have with that, and I'm going to give you a rebuttal that I think others would do, is I'm a giver. So I'm very much like, I'll always help someone else. Mm-hmm. So, like, particularly work's a great scenario of that. Someone comes and goes, I'm overwhelmed. And I'm like, okay, give me this, give me that. I'll take this.
Yeah.
And I don't look at, okay, how does that actually impact me? I often go, but they're all right now and I've helped them for the day. And it kind of fills my cup of, like, I've done my good deed.
Yeah. But I suppose for me, the counter to that is two things. Firstly, it's what you said a minute ago. How can you help someone else if you're not at work? So let's say you give all your time to everybody else and then you end up not having capacity and you end up going on long-term sick. None of those people are getting help. So it's a short-sighted helpfulness. But the other thing I would say is don't shy away from that part of yourself. If you're someone that really loves to take on someone else's work and feel really useful and gets a lot from that, that's fine, but know the cost to that.
Yeah.
So just be aware of that. So at the end of your day, you can be like, okay, I feel really good because I just helped loads of people, but hang on, I've not done any of my work. So when am I going to do that? Like, just be conscious of it. You don't have to lose it. It's returning to yourself. Return back to yourself. Okay, cool. Love this. What's it taken from me today? And how do I make that back up?
What about the narrative that we've spoken a lot about what society's view is? What do you think about the narrative that we have with mental health now? Obviously, we're getting better, but as we mentioned earlier with the move back into getting everyone in the office, I feel like we're kind of half stepping back. I know that office thing is a very small thing, but I can see it having a huge impact on some people. And I just wondered what your perspective is on where we're going. Are we straying from the path a little bit, or are we moving forward?
I think it's a really good question. I think we're definitely moving forward. You know, as you said, the change from this generation to the previous generation. and even the youngsters I see today, like just the transition is definitely getting there. But I think it's happening more at an individual level, and I'd like to see it more at a societal level. I'd like to see society valuing wellness in a genuine way, rather than, as I said today, this idea of you're either well or you're in a mental health crisis that needs some kind of expert support. I think we're still incredibly behind on how we view mental health as a society.
And I think that comes from we can't get people to be open to it. The conversation mental health, it's still they're holding on to that old school thing of like I say, it's that whole you're either right on the cusp of having a breakdown or you're absolutely fine.
Yeah. And also for me, I find it staggering that people don't know how to get good therapists. They don't know what therapist they need. They don't know why they need it. They don't know where to get it from. They don't have an understanding of their own mental health needs in a way that we have lots of other understanding. You know, I can go on to Deliveroo and find any takeaway I want, any all laid out in budget, all laid out in calories, all laid out in style of food, how it's cooked. I can make a very informed choice on the takeaway that I want this evening. Yeah. And yet, if I suddenly find myself needing some support, I don't know where to go. And there's a lot wrong with that, I think.
Yeah. And I think that does come from the whole thing of being ashamed of wanting the support. Because I will say, and I think I've said this before, I took a while to get into therapy because my thought process was, I don't need it as bad as someone else is going to need it. So my fear was I was taking the spot from someone else that needed it more than me. But then, I can't remember, I think it was a friend of mine said, but you're never going to know that because how do you know? like no one's going to come up to you and go, they took your spot and look how great their life's going now.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's exactly that. It's that idea of I need to be a certain level of illness and also the stigma. Like there's no real stigma about ordering a Deliveroo. I mean, unless perhaps you're doing it every single meal, then people start to go, well, that's interesting. But there's no stigma to ordering takeaway. But I think you're absolutely right. I think there is still stigma around seeing a therapist. And I think we do a really good job individually at not judging and not being bothered. But I still think it's in the air.
What I love is a lot of my friends, we're all on it together. So a lot of us, we're all in the same boat. So we don't have that. It's often, they'll ask me, how's therapy going? What was this week? How's this? And that's really nice to see because then it kind of also, you can, as we said earlier, you can learn something from someone else. I go, I never thought that. And I can see that in myself. Yeah. That makes sense.
And I think we are normalising conversations now where people say, my therapist said this or so-and-so suggested this. And I think, there's a lot of influencers out there also doing some really lovely narrative changing because people are open about therapy or therapy conversations. So I think, like I said, individually, I think there's huge positive influencing coming through. It's just, how does it reach the way that society is designed?
Yeah. What do you think is the most surprising benefit of therapy that people might not be aware of? Like one of mine was just the fact that it will change the way you think. And then you'll suddenly look at a scenario and go, I view this very differently to what I did 6 months ago. Yeah. That's my one of it will change your perspective completely. But what would you say as someone that's more directly in the field?
I think that's a really good one. I think maybe it's very freeing.
Yeah.
It's really freeing. I think we talked about narratives a lot today. For me, sometimes I feel like narratives are like they're ribbons sometimes that you carry on your arm, and they can be quite heavy ribbons. And some of those ribbons are really great because they're really aligned in your values and they ground you and they push you forward and they give you energy, and it's kind of like having a weighted thing that kind of propels you. But there are other narratives that are not designed for you, then that they don't fit your needs. they're outdated, they're for someone else. And those ribbons are heavy. They're really heavy and they hold you back. And so there's something for me about the therapy process. And that's why I was saying, you know, you can't just replicate that with other things. There's something about the therapy process that helps you to let go of some of those ribbons.
Yeah.
And so you feel lighter.
It's holding on to stuff. You do less that because, again, I think it's that classic thing of someone's giving you permission to let go.
Exactly.
You go, it's okay to. You're like, you're not going to die, I promise.
Yeah. And that's where, for me, it can be quite complimentary, because if we were better at giving people information and helping people to understand themselves, they might do part of that themselves. Might be like, oh, okay, I don't know if I want that ribbon, actually. Yeah. And like maybe their friends will give them permission, or maybe they'll need to go to therapy to get that permission for whatever reason. Yeah. But how do we start that process? I think we're missing a trick if we don't inform people earlier.
100%. What about, obviously, as we said, we've spoken a lot about narrative, and obviously with that narrative changing, I imagine you've seen a huge uptake in people coming and seeing you. What do you often, like, what's the most common thing that you see clients come to you for support with?
I suppose because I'm in the field of neurodiversity and trauma, most people come to me having experienced something that they're struggling with and it's unresolved.
Yeah. And
a lot of the work that I would do with someone is to help people make sense of it and then process through it. Yeah.
Also, I'm intrigued as well. When supporting someone with ASD, what's the journey like supporting them? Because also their way of thinking can be quite different to traditional. And I can imagine navigating that, because it almost, you have to get to know how they think to then help them. That's my assumption, is get to know how they think to then help them through what they're struggling with. But I wondered, was there any common denominators when you're supporting someone with ASD?
I think because I started my clinical career working in the field of neurodiversity, I have always seen everyone as an individual. And I've always had to adapt any training I've ever had, because all the training and the evidence is based on a neurotypical or one type of mind.
Yeah.
And so I've always had to adapt my practice. That's always been required. And so that's part of who I've always been, I think, as a therapist, is I'm less interested in what your diagnosis is and much more interested in who you are as an individual. And somebody with the same diagnosis as somebody else, still what they need and who they are is very different. So I think that, a lot of time for me is spent on understanding how this person is wired, where are they in their life, and what is their strengths, what's their power.
I love that, though, because as soon as I asked that question, I thought, actually, every bit of therapy has to be bespoke, because they have to know how you think. Because even me, as not as neurotypical, I think in a completely different way to some of my friends.
Exactly.
It's so interesting that we often, it's hard, because I'm a weird believer of the medical model and the social model both have a place. Because I think when you're talking to someone who has no exposure to any neurodiversities, differences, disabilities, wherever they are, you have to give them a framework to start working within. Otherwise, it's such a big minefield. So that's where I think the medical model comes in, and then the social model comes in more so with the everyday life stuff. But I think
for many people, sorry to interrupt, but for many people, the diagnostic framework is incredibly validating. It's one of, I talked about this, it's one of those ribbons that they feel really connects them to where they want to be, and it helps them to understand themselves after years of not understanding. So I think you're right. For me, it's always about, is this valuable to me? Yeah. If it is, great, I'm going to grab it, I'm going to hold it, I'm going to take it wherever I need to go. And that applies to anything, not just diagnosis, just anything in life. I guess what I always want to say to people is, you don't have to just accept the life around you or the views around you. I'm not saying you can be really antagonistic and kind of aggressive, but you could but you could privately say to yourself, does this work for me?
Yeah.
Like, do I want to run with this, or do I want to kind of maybe try and dodge it?
It's so true. And I think as well, it's that whole thing of there's power in the diagnosis, because I think the rebuttal as well is that you can't access certain support without a diagnosis.
Yeah.
And controversially, I do think there is a place for having a diagnosis and being able to access the support, because then it relieves some of the pressure on the systems, because not too many come at once. And that's going to be a controversial point, and people are going to go, you sure you want to say that? But I think it is true of like, we need to make sure we're supporting the right people with the right support.
Yeah.
That's not to say they don't need the support, but they might need a different style of support.
If in doubt, go to the middle. The middle is, you want to keep the medical model, you want to keep the diagnosis for those that need it. It provides structure, it provides framework. But if you go too far into structure and framework, you're trying to fit people in boxes that they don't belong in.
Yep. 100%. And that's where I do think there is a place for both. And I think that's where we need to aim for, because I think there's a lot of discussions, particularly at the moment in the disability space, of getting the right support, too much pressure on the systems. And I do think there's something to be said about it. And on the note of unpopular opinions, I'm going to ask you the last question that I ask every guest, and that is, what's one piece of politically correctness that you really strongly agree with or disagree with?
We talked about food earlier, and I haven't been able to get off the subject since, maybe just because it's about time to have some dinner. But I think Marmite. People have this thing where Marmite, you either love it or you hate it.
Yeah.
I'm not that fussed. I don't mind it. Sometimes I like it. Sometimes I don't.
Yeah, to be fair, unpopular opinion in my family, I'm the same. I can take it or leave it. Like, I'll happily have it, but I wouldn't go searching for it. Whereas my dad is the polar opposite. Yeah. Dad will go searching for it.
Yeah, so I'd like to say that I'm going to take Marmite off that love it or hate it. I know they did a really good branding over it, so maybe that's how it's managed to keep going. But Marmite, it's kind of all right, kind of not.
Yeah, I'm completely with you there. I can take it or leave it. Also, I'm very specific about how I have my Marmite.
Same, actually, same.
Yeah. Because, like, it's got to be on slightly underdone toast, is my opinion.
Yeah, with butter.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, hot butter. The butter has to be completely melted.
Yeah.
Maybe I am more fussy about Marmite than I realised.
It's interesting. Like I say, I love it or hate it in terms of I can take it or leave it, but there is specific...
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Specific criteria.
Yeah, actually, that's true. I'm very specific about my Marmite, but in different ways.
What about, is there one that you, in terms of the psychology sector, an unpopular opinion in the psychology sector that comes to mind?
Do you know what? I'm a middle person. I'm all about the middle. And I don't just say that just to sort of not get into any trouble. For me, maybe that's my opinion.
Stay in the middle.
Yeah, which could be quite unpopular. Is, for me, the middle offers you such richness and such flexibility and such creativity that I never want to stray too far, either one way or the other. And maybe that's unpopular.
I think you're right. I think then you remain impartial, because it's that classic thing I say to everyone whenever I have loads of conversations, and every conclusion I come to is too much of one thing, too much one way, too much the other is a bad thing.
Yeah.
We've just spoken about the social model versus medical model.
Yeah.
You go one way too far, either way.
Yeah, exactly.
Big problem.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm taking the middle path. Yeah.
I completely get that. Marmite's take it or leave it, and middle path is the way forward.
Middle path, I'm not taking or leaving, I'm going.
And of course, we'll link all of Jo's details below. And I'm sure if you have any questions, I'm sure Jo is more than happy to answer them. Also, if you have any questions for me, let me know. Just drop me a message. But thank you so much for coming on, Jo. It's been amazing to chat, and I think everyone's learnt a lot. And I think it's so interesting speaking to someone in your field, because it opens the conversation of looking after yourself, because I think as well, as I've said earlier, it's still classed as that like woo and that whole we'll get there in the end, when actually no, we need to be prioritising it. So thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Not Quite podcast. Please make sure you follow us on TikTok and Instagram to get regular updates about the podcast. These my dads, they get hurt.